Hey guys, tonight we drift gently into the misty waters of Lake Texcoco, where moonlight glimmers on the surface like polished obsidian. You're not in a modern city, though the air feels just as heavy with quiet. You're in Tenochtitlan, the ancient Aztec capital, and it's the dead of night. Water laps against your canoe as you pull slowly through dark, glassy canals, brushing past tall reeds and soft lily pads. There's a faint rustle overhead, a heron shifting in its sleep, and in the distance, temple fires flicker like blinking stars. You're here to visit the Chinampas, the legendary floating gardens that somehow don't float. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't last a day out here. The sun's brutal, the mosquitoes never clock out, and navigating a canoe without falling in, let's just say the snails would get a better workout than you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your hand skims the cool water. It smells faintly of algae and wet bark, rich with the scent of the lake's slow breath. You glide past rows of chinampas, long, narrow islands edged with wooden posts and netted in twisted roots. It's hard to tell where land ends and water begins. A soft splash behind you might be a fish or a toad, or more likely a chunk of loose soil finally giving in to gravity. The gardens are quiet now, everyone's asleep, except the insects and maybe that one suspiciously judgmental egret. You wonder how long these watery farms have been here. Centuries, probably. And still, they work, layer after layer of mud and vegetation, slowly stacked until the lake gave up and said, "Fine, I guess I'm land now." Historians still argue whether the first Chinampas were born of desperation or pure innovation. Some say the early settlers on the islands of Lake Texcoco were forced to farm the water because, well, they were out of space. Others believe the Aztecs deliberately engineered this ecosystem because they wanted to outfarm everyone else. Either way, it worked. You glide closer to one of the gardens. From above, it looks like an enormous green quilt stitched across the lake, each piece brimming with life. Small earthen paths connect the plots, some no wider than a canoe. The air buzzes softly, not with machines, just frogs, crickets, and the occasional nighttime gardener mumbling at their stubborn tomato vines. You dock your canoe near a chinampa lined with willow trees. Their roots dangle in the water like lazy ropes, anchoring the soil as they sway gently with the night breeze. You step off carefully. The mud is springy under your feet, but it holds. Somehow. You half expect to sink like a sitcom character in quicksand, but no, the island welcomes you with a quiet squish and a burst of damp, earthy smell. Above you, the stars are reflected in the canal. Below, beneath the water, tiny snails cling to stalks of aquatic grass. They're small, no bigger than a bean, but they've lived here for generations, eating algae and doing their humble part to keep the Chinampas thriving. One of them blinks at you, or at least you pretend it does. You wander the garden slowly. Even in the dim moonlight, you can see how the crops are arranged with intention. Rows of maize, young and green, sway in unison. In the next plot, squash vines curl like sleeping cats. Farther on, tiny chili plants huddle together like nervous students before a pop quiz. The Aztecs were serious about their farming, and the Chinampas were more than gardens. They were a massive floating lifeline. Each island has its own layout, its own mood. Some are clearly tended by methodical perfectionists, every row aligned, every weed banished. Others have a wild energy, flowers tangled with herbs, beans clinging to anything they can reach. You suspect one of these plots was planted by someone who either really loves chaos or really hates planning. Possibly both. The sky shifts. A few clouds pass like ghosts. You sit on a low bench woven from reeds, listening to the creak of water and wood. You imagine what this place must look like at dawn. Workers poling their canoes from garden to garden, sleeves rolled up, tools in hand. A whole city fed by these floating fields, all because someone thought, you know what this lake needs? More dirt. You reach down and trace the edge of the water. Tiny ripples scatter. A frog croaks nearby, probably complaining about your late night visit. And still, those snails carry on, munching algae like they own the place. You're just a visitor here, a quiet shadow passing through a living museum. Historians still debate whether the Chinampa system was entirely sustainable or just impressively long-lived. There are signs of erosion, of rising salinity in parts of the lake, of changing flood patterns. But for centuries, this symbiotic dance between earth and water, plant and mollusk, worked. It fed the people. It beautified the land. It whispered secrets to the wind. And tonight, those whispers lull you into stillness. You lean back. Let your shoulders drop. The bench creaks again, maybe in protest, maybe in solidarity. The stars ripple once more on the dark water. And the snails, well, they keep doing what they've always done, working quietly while the world sleeps. By now, your eyes are adjusting to the soft half-light of the Chinampa landscape. It's a sleepy kind of brightness, where outlines blur and every motion feels muffled by the air itself. You follow a meandering path, barely wide enough for your feet, lined on either side with maize stalks taller than your head. Their husks rustle gently, brushing your arms as you pass. It's like walking through a breathing corridor of green. There's a sense of rhythm here, a cadence to how the gardens were built, not by accident, but by incredible planning. Each chinampa is formed by carefully layering lake sediment, rotting vegetation, and muck from the bottom of canals. You'd think that would just make a soggy mess, but no. It creates a rich, aerated soil, dark as coffee grounds and strangely buoyant, not floating like a raft, but suspended like a secret just below the surface. You pause at a corner where a cluster of flowering herbs, marigold, episode, and white sage, spills across the path. A few bees drift lazily in their direction, despite the late hour. The Aztecs used marigolds not just for decoration, but to repel pests and guide spirits on the Day of the Dead. Here, every plant has a job, and most of them are pulling double shifts. A soft hooting cuts through the night. An owl, high in one of the willows. You spot it. Round-eyed, contemplative, and probably wondering why you're still awake. Fair enough. Now, try to picture the full scale of this place. The Chinampas weren't just scattered plots. At their peak, they spanned thousands of acres around the heart of Tenochtitlan. A watery quilt stitched by hand, feeding an empire with maize, beans, chilies, squash, and more. Historians still argue whether these gardens alone could have supported the entire Aztec capital, but there's no doubt they played a central role. What's more impressive is the irrigation system. You lean down and dip your fingers into the canal beside you. It's cool and silty and flows in precise, man-made channels. The Aztecs built these canals to allow water to circulate between plots and nourish the roots. But even more brilliant, they also used the canals to move crops. Farmers would load up small reed boats with fresh produce and glide them straight into the city's markets. Imagine Uber Eats, but with paddle power and fewer notifications. Off to your right, a low reed wall separates one chinampa from the next. You step carefully over a wooden plank bridge, probably not up to modern safety codes, and find yourself in a plot with something different: amaranth. You touch one of the crimson stalks, its seeds like tiny beads clustered at the top. This was a sacred plant to the Aztecs, used in rituals and ceremonies. It also happened to be highly nutritious, efficient and holy, a multitasker's dream. And in the shallows between the chinampas, more snails. Tiny brown spirals moving so slowly, you're not sure if they're going forward or just dreaming in place. Some species were eaten, boiled, or roasted as protein-rich snacks. Others served more agricultural roles, keeping algae in check and oxygen flowing through still waters. Historians still debate whether the snails were intentionally cultivated or just convenient freeloaders, but the symbiosis is undeniable. You crouch down to watch one. It's attached to the underside of a lily pad, inching along with microscopic determination. You imagine it has a little snail to-do list. Probably just says, 1, munch, 2, breathe, 3, avoid ducks. There's a quiet dignity in their presence. These miniature creatures overlooked by empires and tourists alike, quietly shaping the world from below. You wonder how many people in the city, just beyond the water's edge, ever thought about the snails. Probably not many, but without them, the balance might have tipped. The smell of wet earth rises around you, deep, ancient, comforting. It's a perfume you didn't know you'd missed. Somewhere behind you, a fish splashes, chasing a ripple, and above, the owl shifts again, as if annoyed by your ongoing fascination with dirt and mollusks. You continue walking. The path now leads through a small cluster of medicinal herbs. You spot tlalpapatli, used for coughs. a few stalks of Yoloxoquetal, the heart flower, tucked beside it. The Aztecs weren't just growing food out here, they were cultivating pharmacies. And yes, some of the remedies worked. Others, less so. Let's just say they got very creative with frog bile. There's something mesmerizing about the system's logic. The Chinampas were engineered to mimic natural wetlands using cycles of decay and renewal. Rotting plants feed the soil, canals prevent overwatering, ducks nibble on pests. And the snails? They sweep the algae and fertilize the muck with all the unglamorous grace of a janitor working third shift. You reach a tree stump fashioned into a seat and sit down. The night presses close around you. You can almost feel the pulse of the land beneath your shoes. It's quiet, but not silent. There's always motion here, the swish of reeds, the hum of insects, the sigh of water returning to itself. And just for a moment, you forget you're visiting the past. You feel like you've always been here, part of the garden's design. Another caretaker, another whisper in the roots. You rise slowly from the stump, stretching your legs and brushing bits of damp moss from your palms. The earth leaves a greenish tint on your fingers like nature's sleepy fingerprint. Ahead of you, the path curves beside a longer, wider canal, a kind of watery boulevard connecting the far ends of the Chinampa network. You follow it without hurry, the surface so still it mirrors the sky, warped only by the occasional ripple from a passing fish, or maybe another ambitious snail. It's easy to forget, in all this lush silence, that this landscape was born from defiance. The Aztecs didn't settle in the valley because it was easy. Quite the opposite. They picked a marsh, a place too soggy for most empires. And what did they do? They invented a way to turn mud into breadbasket. The Chinampas were their response to scarcity, a daily innovation performed with sticks, reeds, and ancient stubbornness. Everywhere you look now, you see evidence of human hands. Bundles of willow branches staked at the corners of the plots, nets made from maguey fiber stretched between low posts keeping out birds or maybe curious deer. And the trees, tall ahuejotes, those thin-limbed willows, they weren't chosen just for their looks. Their roots held the islands in place, stopping erosion and soaking up water like leafy sponges. Some were planted centuries ago. You reach out and press your hand to one that its bark furrowed and cool. If it could talk, you think, it might ask you to stop leaning on it so much. You keep walking. The air carries a faint scent of sweet rot, like wet leaves in autumn. Not unpleasant, just earthy. Honest. You reach a narrow break in the plantings and step down into a canoe bobbing softly at the bank. No one said this was a walking tour. You pick up a worn wooden paddle and push off gently. The boat moves with a kind of hush, parting the duckweed in a slow green wake. Floating here, you can see the genius of the layout even better. The islands are laid out like ribs along a spine, the canals curving between them like arteries. This isn't random. It's not even rustic. It's meticulous. And it wasn't just about food. The Chinampas helped regulate temperature, manage floodwaters, even purify the air. Modern urban planners would call it a multifunctional green infrastructure. The Aztecs just called it home. There's something oddly comforting in how nothing feels rushed. A leaf falls into the water beside you. A turtle slips off a log with a plunk, startled by your boat's gentle passage. A dragonfly makes a lazy circle near your head, reconsidering you as a possible perch. Everyone here seems to have time, even the soil. And then you notice something else, a row of small box-like constructions at the end of one chinampa. Low platforms made of clay and thatch with raised sides and sloped roofs. Beehives. Melipona bees, stingless and sacred. The Aztecs kept them not just for honey, but for wax used in rituals and trade. Their honey was thinner, more floral than the kind you're used to. It was also medicinal, prized for healing wounds and soothing sore throats. You lean forward, but the bees aren't bothered by your presence. They hum softly, focused on more important things. Just like everyone else here, you pass a patch of morning glories, oddly blooming in the wrong time of day. Their pale blue trumpets climb the edge of a woven fence. The Aztecs knew them well. The seeds of this plant contain psychoactive compounds used in ritual divination. You pause, a bit more awake now. No, you won't be sampling that tonight. Probably not ideal for sleep. Historians still debate just how much of the Chinampa system was standardized versus improvised. Some believe there were official guilds or overseers who regulated plot size and water rights. Others suggest it was more of a neighborly, hands-on effort. Help each other dig today, get help hauling maize tomorrow. You prefer the latter. It suits the mood. And the idea of ancient neighborhood bartering feels like the Aztec version of nextdoor.com, but with less arguing about whose dog keeps barking. You coast past a stand of maize, tall, firm, and heavy-headed. You run a hand along the edge of a leaf as you pass. These stalks are thicker than modern corn, more primal, more proud. This was sacred food. Maize wasn't just sustenance, it was identity. The people believed they were made from it, shaped from cornmeal by the gods themselves. You glance down at your hands and wonder how much of your own history is edible. Next to the maize, you spot squash vines curling in fat spirals and beans climbing up poles. It's the Three Sisters method, used long before and long after the Aztecs. Together, the plants help each other thrive. Corn gives beans something to climb, beans enrich the soil with nitrogen, and squash shades the roots. It's the original dream team, a slow food symphony. Your canoe drifts past another garden, this one quieter, more sparse. A grave plot, a ceremonial site, hard to say. Historians still argue whether certain Chinampas had non-agricultural purposes, shrines, homes, even schools. You like that idea. Maybe a young boy once sat here, learning to weave fishing nets while his grandfather told him stories about the snail who outsmarted the heron. Maybe it was just a place to sit and listen to the reeds whisper. Your boat finally glides back to the muddy bank. You step out, your foot sinking slightly into the soft edge, then follow a narrow path back onto firmer ground. There's no rush. Nothing in the Chinampas rushes. Even the weeds grow politely. You pass a small shrine on your way, a stone set upright with flowers laid around its base. Maybe to Tlaloc, the rain god. Maybe just a thank you to the water itself. You leave a thought there, a silent nod to the builders who made floating farms from lake bottom sludge, and to the snails, still working the night shift, scrubbing roots clean in exchange for anonymity. The moon has shifted now, riding higher. Light plays silver on the leaves, and the world smells faintly of mint and clay. You follow a fork in the narrow footpath now, the one overgrown with wild herbs and mysterious little footprints, probably raccoon or opossum, unless the snails got creative overnight. Your sandals make soft scuffs in the loam, and each step seems to sink you deeper into the rhythm of this place, where even the weeds know their place and the frogs hold their counsel in hushed tones. You come across an old man kneeling at the water's edge. His tunic is simple, his hair silver and tied in a loose knot, and he's muttering softly to a small mound of damp earth in front of him. He's pressing something into the soil with practiced care, tiny white pods. You crouch beside him, watching without speaking. He doesn't look up. His hands are cracked but nimble. You realize he's planting amaranth, the ancient grain that once rivaled maize in Aztec kitchens and ceremonies. High in protein, resistant to drought, and pink when it blossoms. It was also considered divine. You wait in respectful silence until he finally speaks, not to you, but to the soil. Eat slowly, little ones, he says. Grow tall, remember us. Then he rises with a quiet grunt, nods to you as if he's known you your whole life, and disappears behind a wall of sunflowers. You're not sure he was ever really there. The air shifts again, a breeze now, just enough to rattle the reeds. You walk on, but your thoughts trail behind, caught somewhere between the memory of the man and the lingering scent of crushed marigold underfoot. To your left, a long platform juts out from one of the Chinampas, a drying rack, you realize, made from interlaced reeds. Thin slices of something reddish-brown are laid out to cure in the sun. You squint. Not fish. Not meat. A closer look reveals small, flattened discs. Spirulina. The Aztecs harvested it from the surface of the lakes, technically a blue-green algae, rich in protein and vitamins. They called it tequitlatl, meaning literally stone excrement, which is admittedly less appetizing. Still, they dried it into cakes, fried it with chilies, and packed it for travel. You imagine astronauts chewing it in space now. The Aztecs were ahead of their time and kind of gross in the best way. Floating on your right, near a tangle of papyrus, you spot movement. Not the confident glide of a fish or the erratic dart of a frog, but something more deliberate, slow, methodical. You kneel and lean in, eyes scanning the water's edge. There. Snails. Aztec apple snails, their spiral shells glinting faintly in the dim light. They moved like underwater monks, cleaning the base of the Chinampas' wooden borders, munching gently on algae. You count 5, then 7, then 12. A whole congregation. Did someone plant them there centuries ago? Or are they just legacy tenants holding a lease older than memory? Historians still argue whether these snails were deliberately cultivated or just a helpful accident of the ecosystem. Some think the Aztecs may have even eaten them, either as protein or medicine. Others insist they were more like maintenance staff, part of the greater floating machine. You prefer the latter. Everyone deserves a job that fits their pace. The canal ahead narrows again, forming a shadowed arch beneath a low wooden bridge. You duck as you pass underneath. On the other side, the mood changes slightly, quieter, as if the trees here are older, or at least more opinionated. You see small bundles hanging from low branches, amulets, offerings, bits of cloth, corn husks folded into dolls, feathers tied with twine, a sacred grove, maybe, or just the neighborhood wishing tree. You pause near a carved post where something shiny catches your eye. Embedded in the wood is a piece of obsidian, still sharp at the edge. A tool? A warning? Maybe a forgotten blade used to cut through roots or stubborn knots, or maybe it was once part of a ritual. Obsidian wasn't just sharp, it was sacred. Mirrors made from it were believed to show glimpses of other worlds, or other versions of this one. You don't touch it, not because you're superstitious, okay, maybe just a little, but because it feels like it's still working, still reflecting. Not light, but time. Across from you, another Chinampa is less cultivated, more wild. Overgrown with tomato vines and wild sage, its fence half collapsed, its trees leaning into the canal like eavesdropping neighbors. Yet you hear buzzing, bees again, and clucking. A coop near the back is home to a few squat, proud turkeys, their feathers puffed like carnival costumes. You watch one strut along the edge, stop, and glare at you. A look that says, I dare you to underestimate me. You nod back. Message received. The Aztecs didn't have many domesticated animals, but turkeys, they took those seriously. Not just food, companions in ceremonies, symbols of fertility and abundance. Turkeys were to them what smartphones are to us: essential, loud, and occasionally ridiculous. As you step onto firmer ground again, you nearly trip over a pile of discarded chinampa tools, rusty digging sticks, broken clay pots, a net still glistening from recent use. You sit for a moment on an overturned basket, letting your legs dangle over the edge. A little mosquito hovers by your ear, and you swat lazily at it, only half-heartedly. Even the bugs here seem less aggressive, more politely annoying. You think about how many hands shape these floating gardens. Not just engineers or farmers, but priests, cooks, children, lovers, thieves. The whole mess of human life, woven into rows of lettuce and amaranth. You wonder if they dreamed at night of falling into the lake, or of flying over it like hummingbirds. Above you, a heron glides silently across the sky. Its wings don't flap, they just glide like a boat on wind. You follow it with your eyes until it disappears behind a grove of fig trees, and for a moment you wish you had wings. But then you realize, what would a snail do with wings? Exactly. The smell of wood smoke drifts in, faint and nostalgic. Somewhere nearby, someone is cooking. Maybe tamales. Maybe frog legs. Maybe snails? Okay, probably not snails. You hope not. You decide to investigate later. Much later. For now, the sky grows softer, smudged with a dusky lavender. And somewhere beneath your feet, the roots hold firm in their muddy beds, the water laps gently at the chinampa edges, and the snails keep moving. Always slowly, always forward. The sun begins to melt behind the horizon now, the way a candle surrenders to the wick, slowly, with a whisper, not a shout. You keep walking, guided more by instinct than direction. Left foot, right foot. The canal is quiet, save for the ripple of fish or the whisper of dragonfly wings. Time is slippery out here. You feel like you've been wandering for hours, or maybe only 10 minutes. Who knows? The snails certainly don't care. You come upon a wide open stretch of Chinampa that's been turned into a sort of communal space. Wooden benches circle a sunken fire pit, now just warm stones and faint ashes. A few gourds sit stacked in a pyramid, bitter when raw, sweet when roasted. Gourds that have been here for centuries, not these exact ones, of course, unless they're really good at pretending not to rot. But the ancestors of these gourds passed from hand to hand, seed to seed, mouth to mouth. Nearby, a young woman stoops over a basket, sorting through herbs. You pretend not to watch her, but her hands are so skilled it's hard not to admire them. She bundles epazote, hoja santa, and tiny wild chiles so potent they could probably fuel a small jet. These weren't just food. Each had its own job. Some healed stomachs, others quieted spirits. Some did both, depending on how much you used and whether you said the right words first. She looks up, just briefly, and offers a nod. Not the kind you return with a wave or a joke, more like the kind that says, I see you, time traveler. Don't mess it up. You nod back. Message received again. You remember learning once, somewhere, maybe in a book, maybe during one of those half-awake podcast marathons, that the Chinampa farmers didn't use the same calendar everyone else did. Not exactly. They lived by cycles, sure. Rainy seasons, dry seasons, planting days, harvesting days, but also by the moods of the lake. Some elders swore the water would speak to them, that it had a pulse you could feel through your knees if you stood still long enough. You try that now. Stop walking. Stop walking. Just breathe. Close your eyes. And yes, there it is. Not a voice exactly, but a presence. A low hum under your skin, in your bones. Like when you're standing too close to a speaker at a concert, but gentler, more forgiving. And probably not playing reggaeton. A frog croaks nearby, interrupting the moment. You open your eyes. Still here, still whole, still walking through a garden that floats on secrets and compost. Further along, you stumble upon what looks like a ceremonial platform. It's elevated slightly above the rest of the Chinampa, supported by thick poles sunk deep into the mud. On top, there's a circle of polished stones. Not just arranged, they're placed, deliberately. A sunstone replica, maybe, or a calendar altar. You step closer and notice the grooves cut into each slab, radiating out like sunbeams. Were these used to track planting cycles, equinoxes, solstices? Historians still argue whether this type of altar was functional or purely symbolic. Some think it doubled as a sundial and a ritual space. Others believe it was a tribute to Tlaloc, the rain god, always watching, sometimes sulking, occasionally demanding child sacrifices. Okay, definitely not bedtime material. Let's just focus on the altar part. You sit on the edge of the platform, your feet dangling above a shallow puddle. A snail glides lazily along the muddy edge, antennae twitching. You wonder what a snail believes in. Probably moisture, maybe gravity. Definitely not human calendars. From here, the view opens wider. You can see more Chinampas stretching out like a patchwork quilt, stitched by a very patient grandmother. Smoke from distant cook fires curls upward. Birds spiral homeward. Somewhere a flute plays. The melody drifts across the water like a memory someone forgot to finish. You imagine an Aztec child sitting here centuries ago, legs swinging just like yours, biting into roasted maize, watching the same sunset, wondering if the world always glowed this orange before night. Maybe wondering why snails never hurry. Maybe not wondering at all, just being. The breeze picks up again, rustling the treetops. You shiver slightly. Not from cold, but from awareness. This place is alive in layers, soil and roots, water and reeds, memory and myth. All tangled, all growing. You hop down and keep moving, passing rows of squash vines twisted like jungle gym ropes. Their blossoms hang like sleepy trumpets, some already folded in for the night. Fireflies start to appear, soft glimmers, blinking on and off like the lake is winking at you. You grin. It's impossible not to. To your left, a small wooden structure leans at a crooked angle. It's a tool shed, maybe, or an old lookout post. You peek inside. More digging sticks, a few cracked baskets, and surprise, what looks like a primitive life vest made from hollow reeds. Not very confidence-inspiring, but hey, they tried. The Aztecs didn't swim much, historically speaking. The lakes were sacred, unpredictable, and full of things you didn't want tangled around your ankles. But some say the Chinampa farmers developed ways to float across short distances on reed mats or even tied together gourds. One fringe theory suggests they trained certain birds to help them fish or navigate the reeds. No proof, of course, but you sort of hope it's true. Your stomach rumbles, not from hunger, but as if it's remembering something. A taste, a smell, a memory not your own. You follow it. At the far end of the clearing, you find a little fire pit, low flames crackling under a clay griddle. No one's tending it now, but a small bundle of food rests nearby, tortillas wrapped around roasted mushrooms and squash blossoms. You glance around, no footsteps, no voices, just the gift, waiting. You take one, tentatively. Bite. It's warm, savory, perfect, and probably enchanted, or cursed. But at this point, who cares? The moon rises over the treetops, pale and round like a scoop of rice pudding, and all around you, the snails continue their quiet patrol. Devout, patient, unimpressed by your sandals and snack theft, you sit again, this time on a smooth log, watching the fire settle into glowing coals. You think about how strange it is, this blend of technology and nature, of engineering and instinct, how the Aztecs built floating gardens not to conquer the land, but to listen to it. And somewhere, back near the spirulina racks or the dried gourds or the sleepy turkeys, the air hums again. Not a warning, not a summons, just a gentle reminder. You're not lost. You're drifting exactly where you're meant to be. The night deepens like ink poured into still water. Shadows grow taller, not darker, folding over the Chinampas in soft silence. You push off from the log and begin walking again. No real aim, just a rhythm. Left, right. Left, right. The kind of walking you do when your mind is both asleep and wide awake, like when you forget why you entered a room, but you're glad you did. A faint chirping rises from the reeds. Crickets, maybe. Or some aquatic cousin whose name only field guides care to remember. The canal beside you has become almost mirror-like, reflecting every flicker of moonlight, every lazy swirl of mist. You reach down and touch the surface, cool, smooth, slick with algae. The sort of touch that makes you forget, momentarily, that you are a visitor here. The lake is so calm it seems to breathe. Your hand returns with a bit of green muck, and nestled inside it, a tiny snail. You lift it gently, balancing it on your palm. Its shell is perfect, whorled like the pattern on a cinnamon bun, if cinnamon buns were made by ancient, extremely slow architects. You marvel at its deliberate motion as it slides forward, antennae flexing. This little creature doesn't know about gods or harvest cycles, but it knows how to move toward moisture, how to find shelter under a leaf. It knows how to survive, which in the end is all anyone ever really needs. You place the snail carefully on a wet patch of wood and watch it vanish into the moonlight. Funny how something so slow can disappear so quickly. You keep walking. Soon you hear something new. A low scraping sound, rhythmic, purposeful. You follow it until you reach another Chinampa, this one different from the rest. It's terraced like a staircase made for giants. Long rows of stones divide the incline into levels, each holding different plants, maize below, beans midway up, squash at the top. It's a living diagram of companion planting, the Aztecs' version of multitasking. Beans fix nitrogen, corn gives them a pole to climb, squash shades the soil. Everyone wins. You could almost hear a TED Talk in the background, how ancient farmers invented sustainable agriculture and didn't even brag about it. At the edge of the terrace, a man sits hunched over a wide stone. He's grinding maize with a metet, his back rising and falling like slow waves. You don't disturb him. His rhythm is sacred. It's not just work, it's meditation, timekeeping, maybe even prayer. The sound of stone on stone is steady, like a heartbeat, a reminder that nourishment doesn't begin in a pot, but in effort. Historians still debate whether Chinampa communities operated as independent networks or as strictly governed extensions of larger Aztec cities. Some claim farmers had a surprising amount of autonomy, choosing what to plant and how to trade. Others argue they were tightly controlled, with quotas and overseers and lots of government nose-poking. Truth is probably somewhere in between, or maybe nowhere. Paper trails didn't survive the lake. Above, an owl hoots softly and takes flight, wings wide, nearly silent. You watch it for a moment, wishing you could follow, float, escape upward. But gravity has other ideas. You start to climb the terraced Chinampa, your hands brushing the leaves of each level. The maize is tall and sturdy, the beans twining like poetry, the squash leaves like umbrellas after rain. You pause halfway up and sit on the edge of a row. Your legs dangle again, seems to be a theme tonight. You look across the moonlit lake. From here, the network of Chinampas stretches endlessly, like puzzle pieces adrift. The channels in between seem narrower than before. You imagine people gliding in canoes, singing soft songs, trading tamales for firewood or news. No need for gold here. Value lived in the earth, in what you could grow, barter, share. To your right, another small shelter. You peek inside. This one's filled with bundles of dried herbs tied in loops and hung from the rafters. The air smells like time itself. Lavender, smoke, pepper, old dirt, and a hint of something electric. You see notes scratched onto bark, little glyphs and diagrams. Someone has been mapping growth patterns, lunar phases, even bug infestations. Not just a farmer, a scientist. Maybe both. There's a clay figure resting on a ledge, small, hand-molded, with snail shell eyes. You blink. It's definitely watching you. Or maybe it just happens to be facing your direction. Either way, you nod respectfully because you've learned better by now. Moving on, you come to another edge where the water laps more freely, as if this Chinampa has loosened its ties to the others. Here, the reeds part for a dock, a narrow plank extending just a few feet over the canal. You sit at the edge, dipping your toes into the water. It's cold, but not unkind. You try to imagine the people who built all of this, day by day, pole by pole, root by root. How many hands it took, how much patience. You wonder if they ever stopped and just admired it, or if they were always too busy carrying baskets, fixing leaks, praying for rain, or brushing off snails who didn't know boundaries. There's an old story, half legend, half footnote, about a woman who lived alone on a chinampa far from the city. She trained snails to follow her voice, fed them crushed maize and dried fish, built a tiny shrine where they could crawl over polished stones and leave silvery trails that looked like constellations. She believed they carried messages to the underworld. No one ever proved she existed, of course, but some say her garden still blooms, wild and untethered, out beyond the reach of the canals. You listen now, not for her voice, but for the hush she left behind. The breeze has shifted, the crickets pause, even the frogs seem to exhale. And for a moment, just a breath, the Chinampa feels suspended, not by mud or roots or stakes, but by memory. You lie back on the plank. Stars swirl overhead, the moon is a cradle, the lake is a lullaby. And somewhere below, the snails keep moving. The sky starts to smear faint shades of indigo and rust, like someone took a charcoal pencil and dragged it softly across the edge of night. But you're still on the dock, still watching the water shift in quiet circles below you, like it's thinking. Your legs are numb now, but you don't really mind. It's that pleasant kind of numbness that comes from doing absolutely nothing for a while. The kind that says, yes, this is the right place to be. A canoe approaches, silently, slowly. You hear the whisper before you see it, the soft hiss of a pole dipping in and out of the water. It glides closer, and you start to make out the figure standing at the back. They're wrapped in a shawl, hair tied back with reeds, and there's something tied to the front of the boat, a small cage. It swings gently with the motion of the canoe. Inside, you guessed it, snails. Not just a couple, a whole spiral of them attached to leaves and clay pieces, forming a portable snail sanctuary. The person doesn't speak, just nods in your direction like, yep, it's snail o'clock, and keeps going. You watch the canoe drift away, trailing a long reflection that looks more dream than vessel. Historians still argue whether chinampas were primarily used for large-scale imperial food production, or if they doubled as personal, even sacred spaces for experimentation and ritual. Some evidence suggests priests maintained their own gardens, cultivating herbs for ceremonies or recording astronomical alignments through planting dates. Others scoff at the idea. Why waste valuable farmland on celestial doodles? But when you see how intentional everything feels, how the rows align just so with the shape of the stars, it's hard not to imagine something bigger than lunch planning going on. You walk again. There's a tug in your chest now, like the canals are pulling you towards something or someone. The landscape is changing, subtly. The chinampas are wider here, with trees planted in firm clusters at their edges. These aren't ordinary trees, they're ahuejotes, tall willows used to stabilize the islands. Their roots reach down and bind with the mud, making the whole system possible. Without them, the chinampas would slide away, vanish. Nature's original zip ties. You run your hand along one trunk, the bark peels in long strips, revealing the pale inner layers. A small beetle scurries out and disappears under a leaf. There's a kind of hush here that isn't silence, it's more like everything is listening, even you. You hear water dripping slowly, rhythmically from somewhere nearby. You follow it and find a small altar built from volcanic stone. On top, someone has arranged snail shells in concentric circles like miniature pyramids. Dried flowers scatter the surface, marigolds you think curling at the edges like burnt paper. And nestled in the middle, a bowl of maize kernels, half filled with water. You don't know the ritual, no one left instructions. But the symbolism is hard to miss. Life spirals, food offered, water shared. You sit for a moment in front of the altar, unsure whether to pray or simply absorb. As the light continues to shift, you begin to notice small markers along the paths, woven mats, sticks planted in the mud, carved stones bearing glyphs of snails, birds, or the sun. Not signage, exactly, but clues. This was a mapped world, even without Google, even without street names. The canals ahead converge slightly, forming a wide, flat basin. You reach it just as the water catches a rare sliver of sunlight pushing through the clouds. The reflection is almost blinding. You squint, and in that moment, you see a figure crouched near the water's edge. She's old, or at least she seems old, her back curved like a question mark, hair silvered and knotted. She's holding a snail very gently between thumb and finger. Then she leans forward and whispers something to it. You can't hear what. The snail waves its little antennae in approval. Then she sees you. She beckons you forward without speaking, and you follow, because of course you do. She has that look, the I know things that only grandmothers and street cats can pull off convincingly. She motions for you to sit beside her on the low stones. You do, cross-legged like a kid on a field trip, half expecting a story. And she delivers, in the way people do when they don't use words. She opens her satchel and takes out small clay tablets, each inscribed with spirals and lines. She sets them in the mud, forming patterns. Then she places snails on top of them. And you watch. The snails begin to move, not randomly, but in synchronized spirals. She guides them gently with drops of water, tiny fragments of plantain leaf, a whisper here and there. Slowly, they trace symbols in the mud, lines that echo ancient glyphs, celestial alignments, or maybe just a really elaborate spiral doodle. You're transfixed. Not by speed, obviously. This is the slowest art show in history, but by meaning, by patience, by care. She finally speaks. Just once. They remember. That's all. Then she gathers the snails, the tablets, the symbols, and packs them away like mist into morning. Historians debate whether the Aztecs had domesticated or semi-sacred uses for snails, beyond food and symbolism. Some argue they were just another protein source. Others note their appearance in mythology, in carvings, in unexpected places like codices and ceremonial regalia. The presence of so many shells in burial sites suggests more than just dinner scraps. Maybe snails were seen as guides between layers of the world, from water to earth to sky, their slow movement echoing the turning of time itself. The old woman stands, nods once, and vanishes between two trees, like the ending of a folktale you're not quite ready to finish. You stay on the stone a while longer. The water has stilled again. The sky is lighter now, gray-blue with streaks of honey at the edges, but time still feels irrelevant. The Chinampas don't need a clock. They follow the rhythm of frogs, the rise of sap, the tilt of sun. A small snail crawls across your foot, tickling slightly, leaving a delicate line of shimmer. You laugh quietly. It feels like a signature. You rise and begin walking again. You follow the path without thinking, one foot in front of the other, like the ground already knows where you're going. The air is thicker here, mossy, fragrant, humming with invisible wings. A dragonfly the size of a popsicle skims past your ear, and you flinch instinctively. It pauses midair, as if to judge your reaction, then zips off with all the arrogance of a creature that can hover. On either side of you, the Chinampas stretch wide, more wild now. Less geometry, more chaos. Vines tangle in the corners. Squash blossoms spill like golden trumpets over the banks. And somewhere, very faintly, you hear a flute playing. One of those bone flutes made from, yes, actual bone. Not human, probably. Hopefully. The music wavers in and out, rising like steam. You don't follow the sound. You just let it pull you like a thread wrapped loosely around your ribs. You're deep in the zone now, Chinampa Central. This part doesn't feel like it's pretending to be natural. It is natural, rewilded in the most carefully unkempt way. In the distance, you spot figures hunched over rows of amaranth, barefoot, wrists covered in mud, moving methodically. They barely look up. That's how you know they're real. Anyone faking it would definitely give you a side eye. You stop beside a low platform built of woven reeds. Sitting there is a young man in an embroidered tunic, mashing something with a stone mortar. He doesn't seem surprised to see you. No one here ever is. He nods toward the bowl like, "Wanna try?" And you lean closer. It's a paste, greenish, gritty, smells like crushed cactus and pond water. Not exactly appetizing, but interesting. He dabs a little on the back of your hand. Warm, sticky. Snail sunscreen, he says without smiling. You blink. He goes back to mashing. Historians still argue whether Aztec sun protection methods were ceremonial, medical, or a bit of both. Some sources mention using snail mucilage mixed with herbs to create a balm that soothed and shielded the skin. Others dismiss it as apocryphal, too weird to be real. But when you're standing under a sun that feels one wrong step away from vaporizing you, even snail goo starts to sound reasonable. The boy gestures to the canal where clusters of water lilies float, petals open like they've been gossiping all morning. Among them, more snails. Of course. You're starting to think this might actually be their city, and the humans are just staff. You drift again, your feet finding stepping stones that weren't there before. Every surface here feels repurposed. Canoes become tables, baskets double as planters. Even an old clay idol has a succulent sprouting from its ear. No waste, no hurry. You could get used to this. Up ahead, a wide clearing opens. This one's different, not farmland, not ritual ground. It's a school, sort of. You wouldn't call it a classroom. There are no desks, no chalkboards. But there's a group of children crouched in a circle, whispering urgently over something in the dirt. You approach quietly. They're watching a snail, one snail, moving slowly, painfully slowly, across a grid they've etched with sticks and stones. They're taking notes. On bark paper sheets, no less. You kneel beside them, curious. One kid, maybe 7 years old, leans over and says, very seriously, "We're testing directional loyalty." You try not to laugh, because this is clearly important. You nod instead. The snail continues, oblivious to its academic significance. This is Kalmakak, not the one reserved for nobility, but a localized, Chinampa-specific version. These kids are learning navigation, hydrology, crop rotation, and apparently snail psychology. There's no textbook for this, just trial error and lots of staring at things that don't move very fast. A teacher arrives, not with a ruler or a robe, but with a carved flute and a basket of seeds. He sits in the circle and begins a story. You don't understand all the words. Nahuatl flows like water laced with gravel, but you catch fragments. The moon's reflection in the canal, a snail that carried time on its back, the boy who became an axolotl. The children listen with the kind of focus adults reserve for tax season or fire alarms. You're not sure if this is history, myth, or both. Probably both. That seems to be the rule here. Historians debate whether Aztec educational systems prioritized astronomy over agriculture, or if they were treated as inseparable. After all, if planting times depended on star patterns, you weren't just farming, you were decoding the cosmos. And if snails moved in tune with lunar tides, which some fringe researchers suggest, maybe these kids were more onto something than anyone gives them credit for. Eventually, the story ends, not with a moral, but with laughter. One kid points at a snail and says, "He's cheating," and the whole group dissolves into chaotic giggles. Even the teacher chuckles and shakes his head as if to say, "That's life." You rise and wander off before they notice you're still squatting there like a weird uncle from the future. You're not sure how much time has passed. It's that kind of day, the timeless kind. You find yourself near the edge of a wider canal. The water here is so clear you can see fish darting between the reeds, flashing silver like loose coins. You sit on a ledge and dangle your fingers in. The current is barely a whisper, but the snails are still moving, slow, deliberate, impossible to stop, like a secret being carried inch by inch across centuries. You sit a while longer, letting the quiet press in. Even the breeze seems to tiptoe here. The surface of the canal has turned to glass, reflecting the sky so perfectly it's hard to tell where the water ends and the world begins. Somewhere in the shallows, a snail clings to a lily stem with the casual persistence of someone who has never rushed a single thing in their life. You trail your fingers through the water, tracing lazy spirals. The warmth is pleasant, like bathwater left out in the sun. There's a softness to it, a silty kind of smoothness that makes you wonder what minerals are hiding beneath your hand. Maybe crushed obsidian or centuries of dissolved maize. Maybe just the usual snail slime. You try not to dwell on that part. A gentle splash interrupts your musing. You glance over your shoulder and spot a woman carrying a bundle of reeds on her back. Her skirt is tied at the knees, and her arms are roped with muscle that only comes from lifting wet things for a very long time. She catches your eye, smiles faintly, and nods toward a canoe tethered to the bank. So you clamber in, hoping it's not considered rude. She unties the line and gives the vessel a practiced shove with her foot, stepping in with the grace of someone who's done this since before she could spell her own name. The boat rocks slightly but rights itself immediately, and then you're off, gliding along the canal like an offering carried by the current. It's quiet for a while, just the swish of the paddle and the buzz of insects in the air. The woman hums now and then, a low, steady rhythm that might be a song or might just be habit. You don't ask. It doesn't feel like a place for questions. Instead, you take in the view. The Chinampas here are older, less curated. Trees grow right out of the corners, moss clings to the walkways. There are no symmetrical rows of crops, just patches of greens and purples scattered like spilled paint. And then you notice them, the gardens. Not vegetable beds or flower plots, though there's plenty of that too, but actual floating gardens. Rafts of woven reeds lashed together, buoyed by empty gourds and stuffed with mud, slowly drifting between the anchored islands like gentle green ships. Each one is unique. Some are miniature herb farms, others are home to birds who seem to treat them like seasonal real estate. And a few, your favorites, are dedicated entirely to snails. Dozens of them, different species, different sizes, all clinging to wet leaves and sun warmed bark like they're attending a very slow moving party. Historians still puzzle over whether these mobile chinampas were experimental farming tools, symbolic offerings, or something in between. Some accounts suggest they served a ceremonial purpose, floating altars to the water gods. Others insist they were simply the result of good old-fashioned problem solving. If you run out of land, build more. And if you're not in a rush, why not let it drift? The woman steers the canoe between two of these mobile gardens, and you reach out to touch one. The reed surface yields slightly, like a firm mattress, and a snail immediately begins retreating into its shell, as if you've interrupted its afternoon poetry reading. You smile and apologize softly, even though it can't hear you. Probably. The boat glides onward, threading through a wider patch of canal, and suddenly the air smells different, richer, almost sweet. The source becomes clear when you round the bend, a floating nursery of flowering plants, each in full bloom, petals like painted tissue paper trembling in the breeze. You've entered what could only be described as the Chinampa greenhouse zone, though nothing is under glass. Hummingbirds dart from blossom to blossom, wings whirring like tiny motors. Bees buzz lazily, too drunk on nectar to be aggressive. And there, yes, more snails. You're beginning to suspect they have some sort of union. One garden holds only marigolds. Another is packed with tall stalks of maize in various shades, from ghostly white to deep bruised purple. There's a chinampa growing nothing but medicinal herbs, epazote, sage, even a wild aloe that oozes thick gel when the leaves split. The woman paddles to the edge of this floral flotilla and stops the boat. She nods toward a flat patch of reeds, and you step off gingerly, half expecting to sink. You don't. Don't. The structure is solid, buoyed by invisible physics and ancient design. Around the edge, small clay figures are nestled among the plants, tiny gods with round bellies, stubby arms, and slightly smirking faces. Offerings, maybe, or reminders. You crouch beside one and notice something nestled near its feet. A snail shell, spiral perfectly intact, gleaming in the sunlight like a secret. You hold it up. Light filters through the curve, casting faint rainbows on your palm. It's heavier than you expect, like it remembers everything it's ever carried. The woman watches you silently, then reaches into her basket and pulls out another item, a bundle of dried maize husks tied with colored thread. She places it beside one of the gods and murmurs something too soft to catch. You follow her lead, setting the snail shell next to a carved figure with outstretched hands. It feels oddly appropriate. A trade, maybe, or a thank you. Scholars argue about the role of animals in Aztec spiritual life, especially snails. Some interpret them as symbols of the moon, of fertility, or of time itself. Others say they were just snails. But when you're standing in a floating garden surrounded by blossoms and gods and the faint echo of flute music, symbolism starts to feel less like an academic debate and more like a truth you don't need to explain. The woman gestures for you to return to the canoe, and you do. As you sit down, the boat dips slightly, then rights itself. She paddles on, past more drifting gardens, more clusters of life balanced between sky and water. You float quietly, watching snails cling to vines, sunbathe on flat stones, and generally continue their reign as the most unbothered creatures in the empire. You're beginning to understand why they were worth studying. The canoe moves deeper into the canal maze, and you recline a little, letting your spine melt into the slight curve of the boat's backrest. There's something about the way the shadows shift overhead, the branches crisscrossing like latticework, that makes your eyelids heavy, like they've started negotiating with gravity behind your back. The woman up front doesn't speak. She just paddles, her movements methodical and hypnotic, like a living metronome. You watch as water drips from the oar's blade in slow, glistening beads, catching fragments of light like tiny suns. Somewhere nearby, a frog croaks once, then reconsiders. You drift past a broken chinampa, its corner sunken, plants growing at odd angles. Saplings poke out of the wooden sides like survivors from a long-forgotten shipwreck. Time has slumped it sideways, and no one seems in a rush to fix it. Still, it floats. Historians argue about how often these artificial islands needed maintenance, and whether families passed them down like heirlooms or abandoned them when they became too burdensome. Some believe each Chinampa had a kind of personality, reflecting the people who built it. Others insist they were communal, rebuilt together after every flood or failure. You lean over the edge of the canoe and catch sight of a turtle sunning itself on a stray plank. It blinks once at you, then closes its eyes again, deciding you're not worth the trouble. You respect that. As the canal narrows again, the vegetation thickens. Here, vines drape like curtains across the water, and moss creeps along the trees in velvety swirls. A few fallen branches float idly, waiting for some child or mischievous axolotl to transform them into a plaything. You pass a chinampa covered in chili peppers. Bright reds, oranges, and purples hang like ornaments, and you imagine someone with a truly reckless palate harvesting them for a ceremonial salsa. Maybe there's a brave soul somewhere, a kind of Aztec chili daredevil, snacking his way into legend, possibly crying, probably shirtless. A few plots down, you see cacao trees, the sacred source of chocolate, rising in rows, their pods large and waxy like hanging lanterns. Chocolate wasn't the sweet comfort food we know today. In Aztec culture, it was a drink of the elite, bitter and frothy, often mixed with chili or maize. Warriors drank it, priests offered it, emperors hoarded it, and you, drifting through this floating jungle, are just starting to crave it. Don't even think about it, your stomach says. We both know you'd spill it on your shirt. Fair enough. A low hum vibrates through the water, not mechanical, not ominous, just the collective drone of life in bloom. Bees, crickets, something that might be a bird and might be an annoyed squirrel. You let it wash over you, like a lullaby composed entirely of background noise. The boat turns again. This part of the canal is even more secluded. The banks rise slightly, forming a shady pocket where the air cools and the light softens. You pass under a tree with bark like old paper and leaves that seem to whisper when they rub against each other. It feels older here, not just in age, but in spirit. Like the Chinampas know they're far from the city, from the rituals, from the scrutiny of officials. They breathe easier out here. You come upon another snail colony, this one on the remains of an abandoned fishing net, now used as scaffolding for a miniature garden. They spiral across it, delicate and absurd, like they're building an empire out of rope. One in particular catches your eye. Its shell is darker, almost black, with a spiral so tight it feels mathematical. It's perched near the center, unmoving, radiating gravitas. You name him Javier. He looks like a Javier. Snails, like many small creatures in Aztec symbolism, walked the line between mundane and mystical. Some stories linked them to rain, others to creation myths. A few carvings even show snails emerging from the mouths of gods or tucked in the hands of fertility icons. No one's quite sure if they were revered, feared, or just a convenient metaphor for slowness. But here in this shadowy inlet, surrounded by whispering trees and half-sunken dreams, you start to think they were onto something. The slowness, the patience, the sheer indifference to urgency. You glance at Javier again. He hasn't moved. Legend. As the boat rocks gently beneath you, the woman begins humming once more, a different tune this time. Lower, older. You feel it more than you hear it, like your bones are remembering something they never knew firsthand. You close your eyes. Images swim up behind your lids, reeds tied in bundles, snails spiraling across stone altars, flowers bobbing in water like nodding heads. You see a young girl planting beans into wet soil with her thumbs, pressing them down with a tenderness usually reserved for cradling infants. You see a boy chasing dragonflies between rows of amaranth, leaping from one floating bed to another with the recklessness of someone who trusts the water to forgive him. And then, unexpectedly, you see an old man sitting cross-legged at the canal's edge, carving snail shells into beads. He strings them on threads of maguey fiber, muttering as he works. Maybe prayers, maybe just a commentary on the weather. His hands are steady, calloused, his eyes never leave the shells. You open your eyes again. The boat is stopped beside another Chinampa. This one isn't planted. It's stacked with stones, carved figurines, bundles of sticks, and odd ceramic bowls half submerged in muddy water. A shrine of sorts. The woman gestures toward it. You step out, heart ticking quietly in your ears. The ground feels solid enough, though the reeds creak beneath your weight like they're trading gossip about your shoe size. You crouch beside a shallow bowl and peer inside. It's filled with snails, tiny, live, some still mid-slide. They've been arranged into a spiral pattern, their shells forming a whorl that leads to the center. One larger shell sits right at the core, sunlit and faintly iridescent. You don't touch it, you just look. This isn't about understanding, you realize. Not fully. It's about respect, observation, allowing things to unfold at their own pace, even if that pace is somewhere between glacial and eternal. The woman touches your shoulder lightly, and you rise. She doesn't speak. She doesn't have to. You both step back into the canoe, and as she pushes off from the Chinampa, the water carries you forward again, deeper into this winding dreamscape where gods, farmers, and snails all share the same slow heartbeat. The boat slides forward, so gently now it feels like the water is carrying you of its own accord, like it has decided you're not a burden after all. You drift on the hush of late afternoon where the light starts to turn syrupy gold, stretching shadows into sleepy animals and flicking sunbeams across the canal's surface like scattered coins. You pass a cluster of chinampas thick with corn, their stalks swaying in a slow rhythm that matches your own heartbeat. Some of the ears are nearly as tall as you, wrapped in husks that seem to whisper secrets to each other. One of them is probably gossiping about your hair. Corn doesn't care about tact. Maize wasn't just food, it was life. The Aztecs believed they were made from it, quite literally. In their creation myths, the gods shaped humans from corn dough, then blew life into them like celestial bakers. It explains why the crop wasn't merely cultivated, it was worshipped, celebrated with feasts, rituals, even sacrifices, which, if you think about it, is kind of like you throwing a birthday party for your refrigerator and inviting your toast to officiate. Still, standing on these ancient floating farms, you understand the reverence. Corn stretches deep into the soil of the culture, not just in bellies, but in bloodlines. You glimpse a few wooden effigies tucked along the rows, vaguely humanoid, with corn husks braided around their necks. Guardian spirits, scarecrows with a flair for fashion. Historians aren't sure. Some say they were offerings left behind to honor the rain gods or protect the next harvest. Others think they were place markers for a family's sacred spot, a chinampa with history, emotion, and perhaps some buried gossip of its own. You reach another bend, and the canal opens into a wider lagoon where several chinampas form a quiet village, a cluster of reed and mud huts with smoke rising from one or two chimneys. Chickens mill around on the edges, feathers fluffed, toes muddy. A dog watches you pass with the kind of expression only dogs and disgruntled philosophers can pull off. Another drifting soul, I see. Best of luck. You spot a boy knee-deep in the shallows, flipping over flat stones with the dedication of someone looking for something important, or perhaps just trying to avoid chores. He finds a snail and inspects it, then gently places it back under the water with the care of a museum curator handling a lost Picasso. You approve. Javier would approve, too. You pass a hut where the smell of roasting cacao wafts through the air. It's bitter, earthy, slightly floral. You wonder again about the sacred drinks the nobles once made, frothing their chocolate with carved sticks until it puffed into a luxurious foam. Sometimes they added vanilla, sometimes chili, sometimes you sigh heavily. Blood. Of course. because Aztec rituals loved a dramatic flourish. Even chocolate wasn't safe from a little theatrical sacrifice. You probably won't survive this doesn't just apply to time travel, it applies to ancient snacks too. As you round another corner, a bridge comes into view. It's rickety and low, made of lashed reeds and planks that look like they gave up resisting the weather years ago. The woman ducks her head, and you do too, even though you could probably clear it with a hop. Still, better safe than concussed. Beneath the bridge, the shadows deepen. You pass into a brief, echoing tunnel of quiet. It smells like wet stone and old secrets. You half expect to see something carved along the underside, glyphs or warnings or snail graffiti. But there's nothing, just the water's gentle slap against the wood. When you emerge, the canal narrows once more, and the light returns, warmer than before, tinged with amber. You find yourself among chinampas covered in flowers. Marigolds mostly, their orange heads nodding like sleepy grandmothers in prayer. The scent is thick and nostalgic, like candle smoke and warm bread and your favorite sweater after it's been folded away for too long. Marigolds were important in Aztec ritual, especially during ceremonies honoring the dead. Their petals were used to form paths guiding spirits back home, their bright colors thought to catch the eyes of the departed. You watch as the breeze ruffles a few into the canal, where they spin in lazy circles, dancing on the current. A floating altar appears on your left. Just a small raft, really, but arranged with such care. Copal incense still smoldering in a clay pot, corn husks folded into figures, a cracked ceramic bowl filled with river water and three pebbles. One has a snail shell resting on top, like a crown. Historians still argue whether these types of floating altars were common practice or rare, sacred exceptions. Some suggest they were part of seasonal festivals, drifting offerings meant to float from Chinampa to Chinampa, sharing blessings across the waterway. Others believe they were personal, one family's quiet ritual, unnoticed by the city's larger machinery of ceremony and calendar. You like the second theory better. There's something touching about it. One person, one offering, one raft, a floating prayer sent into the canal's winding arms. Your guide, the silent paddler, glances over her shoulder briefly, her expression unreadable. There's a softness there now, maybe even a hint of pride. You suspect this route isn't shown to everyone. The boat eases forward past the altar and into another clearing where chinampas give way to tangled reed beds and shallow pools. A flock of herons lifts off nearby, their wings slicing the air in unison. You track them as they vanish into the orange sky, long legs trailing like dangling threads behind a dream. The air cools slightly. The shadows lengthen. You pass another pile of snail shells stacked like a cairn on the canal bank. Some are painted, crude little glyphs in faded red. Suns, rain clouds, maybe names, maybe wishes. You imagine someone adding one shell each year, maybe a kid, maybe an elder, maybe someone long gone. You don't know what it means exactly, but it doesn't matter. Meaning isn't always in the explanation. Sometimes it's in the ritual. As your boat glides onward, you become aware of just how quiet everything has gotten. Not empty, just settled. Like the land itself has exhaled. The snails keep sliding, the water keeps rippling, and the marigolds keep shedding petals like tiny blessings. You breathe in, deep and even. Whatever lies ahead, you're not in a rush. The canal narrows again, and with it the hush deepens, thicker, as if the water and the trees are conspiring to slow you down. You can't quite tell if it's dusk now or just the canopy drawing in closer, reed walls curling up like the edge of a warm blanket. The sun is lower, slanting through the water-laden air in golden threads that seem to suspend dust motes mid-dance. Ahead, something glints. At first, you think it's another snail, but as you draw closer, you see that it's glass. Tiny colored beads glimmer from within the banks, reds, blues, greens, half buried in the soil. You reach out, curious, and your fingers brush around one. Cool. Perfectly smooth. You leave it there, because this isn't your world. Not really. The Aztecs prized beads and miniature ornaments, and these little treasures, known as chalchihuitl, often made of jade, turquoise, or obsidian, were used in offerings. Historians think these beads were sometimes buried with seeds to bless the next harvest. Others argue they were simply lost trinkets, dropped by careless children or worn smooth by the same elders who chewed on cacao beans and offered prayers to the gods of maize and rain. The truth is, as always, probably both. Life mixes the sacred and the mundane like some cosmic tamale recipe with no written instructions. Your boat noses around another lazy bend. Here, the Chinampas are smaller, more crowded. Personal. A kitchen garden, perhaps, where squash vines creep up poles made from dead saplings. Banana leaves fan out like lazy green umbrellas. You pass a woman bent over her plot, humming. She doesn't look up, but the song wraps around the space like a lullaby written by the water itself. No one records these kinds of songs. They vanish as soon as they're sung, leaving only the hush of memory behind. You notice now that this area is different. Quieter, yes, but also older. There are stones embedded in the Chinampa walls, carved stones, clearly repurposed from some forgotten temple or shrine. Faces weathered smooth, glyphs eroded into mystery. You wonder who placed them here. Did someone carry these pieces from a ruined pyramid? Was it an act of reverence or practicality? Historians still argue about this kind of architectural recycling. Were these acts of devotion, conservation, or just convenience? A frog croaks lazily nearby, breaking your trance. It sounds judgmental. You ignore it and lean over to trail your fingers in the water. It's warmer now, softer somehow, like the canal itself has absorbed the long day and is offering it back to you in the form of comfort. Below the surface, you spot movement. Another snail, this one with a shell spiraled in delicate shades of pink and ochre. It glides along the silty bottom with a purpose only it knows. In the grand theater of Aztec agriculture, snails were rarely mentioned in official codices, but they must have been constant companions, quiet, slimy footnotes to the grander stories of conquest and tribute. And yet, in some old clay figurines, archaeologists have found depictions of snails. Stylized, coiled, unmistakable. Were they pets? Symbols? Jokes left by bored sculptors? One fringe theory suggests that the spiral of the snail's shell represented the cyclical nature of time, sacred in Mesoamerican calendars, the past winding into the future, life looping back into itself, again and again. You sit with that thought for a while. Up ahead, a child runs along the edge of a chinampa, arms out like wings, balanced with the giddy confidence of someone who's fallen 100 times and never broken anything important. A dog trots behind, tongue lolling. Neither of them notice you. You're just a passing shadow. You drift past what looks like a shrine, just a few stones arranged in a semicircle, centered around a wooden carving, the face of Tlaloc, god of rain, its eyes wide and spiraled like water caught mid-splash. Someone's placed a bundle of reeds beneath it, along with a few snail shells and, oddly, a feather, maybe from a quetzal, maybe just a particularly stylish chicken. Either way, it fits. Tlaloc, according to the Aztecs, lived in a paradise of endless moisture called Tlalocan. It was one of the afterlife realms, a kind of leafy, fog-drenched spa for souls who died from drowning, lightning, or wait for it, snails. Okay, not snails exactly, but diseases that the Aztecs believed were linked to water spirits. The line between ecology and theology was blurry. The boat slows slightly as you pass this sacred corner, as if even your guide knows to tread softly. You catch a whiff of incense, copal again, or maybe just smoke from a kitchen fire farther off. Either way, it settles into your thoughts like a thread of memory pulling tight. You pass another cluster of Chinampas, this time more chaotic. Broken fences, wilted stalks, an abandoned canoe half sunken into the mud, its sides green with algae. The ruins of someone's attempt at cultivation, now reclaimed by the water. But even here, snails thrive. You spot them clinging to the boat's edge, to stones, to a discarded gourd. They're everywhere, these tiny spiral custodians. Patient, persistent, insistently unfazed. You start to suspect they know more than they let on, that maybe if you leaned in close enough, they'd whisper the secrets of the canal to you. Not in words, but in patterns. Spirals, trails, the shape of persistence in the mud. You breathe in again, and the air is softer now, tinged with the promise of night. A bat flits past. A water bug zips across the surface like it's late for an appointment. You're exactly where you need to be. The woman steering the boat shifts slightly, guiding you toward a wider waterway ahead. The current tugs more noticeably here, pulling you into what feels like a deeper part of the network. Maybe this was once a ceremonial channel. Maybe it still is. You let yourself sink into the moment. Water, dusk, spirals of smoke and memory curling into the slow hush of twilight. You don't speak. You don't need to. The snails have said enough. The boat slips silently into the wider channel, and it feels like crossing some invisible threshold, like stepping from a warm hallway into a cavernous, candlelit cathedral. The banks retreat, the sky opens, and you're aware of how small your boat is again, how vast this watery world remains. The canals are no longer cozy, they're grand now, stately. Even the ripples seem to move with more intention, as if part of a slow, ancient choreography. Above, herons glide low, their wings barely brushing the water. You can hear the faint calls of night birds now, and somewhere in the distance, a splash, too big to be a fish, too elegant to be an accident. You don't investigate. That's how horror movies start. Instead, you admire the scene. This is likely one of the main navigational arteries of ancient Xochimilco, a kind of botanical freeway linking markets, temples, and homes. Flat-bottomed canoes would have glided here all day, full of produce, reeds, flowers, and sometimes live animals. Some carried messengers or tribute collectors. Others carried soldiers or priests on official business, probably glaring dramatically into the middle distance because that's just good priestly branding. As you float here, imagining the soft bump of paddle against dock, you wonder how organized the whole system must have been. Historians still debate whether the canal traffic had rules. Some evidence suggests specific lanes for trade, others for ritual travel, but no one's found an ancient no-wake zone sign, so conclusions remain tentative. To your left, a faded carving juts from the bank, an eagle clutching a cactus. The edges are worn, but the meaning is unmistakable. The founding myth of the Mexica, the people who became the Aztecs, told of an eagle perched on a cactus devouring a snake. When they saw this sign, they'd found their promised land. That myth, more than a history, guided their migrations and their map-making. What's remarkable is that this canal network predates even that legend by centuries. The Chinampa system, in its earliest forms, was developed by civilizations like the Xochimilca long before the Mexica rose to power. When the Aztecs arrived, they didn't invent floating gardens. They adapted, optimized, and militarized them. The story is a lot like inheriting a perfectly good kitchen and immediately deciding it needs more obsidian knives and better drainage. You drift past one particularly large Chinampa. This one is strange, entirely overgrown with no sign of recent cultivation. The reeds here stand tall, shoulder to shoulder like silent guards, but at its center you catch a glimpse of something wild. Flowers. Not the usual marigolds or dahlias, but something rarer. Orchids, maybe, or ancient cultivars long since lost to time. You can almost smell them, even from here. Sweet, delicate, the kind of aroma that floats into your nose and makes a home in your hippocampus forever. Botanists theorize that the Aztecs didn't just grow food here. They experimented, crossbreeding, hybridizing, creating floral varieties for ceremonies, for perfume, for medicine. One rare flower, Tenochtitlan, known today as vanilla orchid, was so highly prized that only nobles and priests had access to it. Imagine being a farmer and having to hand over your best-smelling vines so some high priest could rub it on his jaguar cloak. Still, the diversity was stunning. Historians argue whether the Chinampas were truly floating gardens or better understood as fixed, raised platforms, but everyone agrees they were bursting with life. Corn, amaranth, chilies, beans, and flowers. Always flowers. Even the snails seem to like them. Some modern researchers have found snail shells clustered suspiciously around floral beds, as if they were secretly hosting some kind of spiral-shaped spa retreat. The boat coasts lazily again. You're not steering anymore. The canal knows where to take you. The banks change once more, becoming lower, more open. You pass another human-made structure, a low wall of volcanic rock, stacked with care, each stone nestled like a sleeping dog. You notice grooves worn into a few, indentations where ropes were tied, where boats were pulled up, where goods were unloaded. This was a dock, a busy one, once. You can almost hear the slap of sandals on damp wood, the grunt of a merchant lifting baskets of squash. Maybe, just maybe, there's still something buried beneath this wall. A lost amulet, a crushed obsidian blade, a snail shell inked with ancient pigment meant as an offering or a prank. Who knows? The world of the Chinampas is a palimpsest. Layer upon layer of use, reuse, repurposing. A garden planted over a shrine, a dock built from temple stones, a sacred carving used to anchor a fishing net. You can't separate the sacred from the mundane here. They're braided together like river reeds into something much stronger. The moon is higher now. You hadn't noticed her rising, but there she is, perfectly round, casting silver glints across the water. You feel like you're drifting through a mirror, the sky above repeated perfectly below. A breeze lifts, the reeds shiver. Somewhere, a distant drum beat pulses, faint, rhythmic, like the last echo of a forgotten ceremony. Or maybe it's just your heartbeat amplified by the quiet. The woman steering your boat hums again, a different tune now, lower, slower. Maybe a lullaby, maybe a warning. You can't tell, but you don't mind. You lean back. Let the boat rock you gently. The snails are still with you, tucked into the shadows, gliding over roots, curled in algae. They don't rush. They don't need to. They've seen it all before. You round a bend where the canal narrows again and the air feels different, cooler, scented with something like crushed mint and moss. Overhead, branches lean out from one side to another, forming a gentle canopy. The moonlight sifts through in strips and shapes, flickering across your boat, your skin, the water's skin. It's as if the trees are draping veils of shadow and silver across your path, inviting you deeper into a place even the maps forgot. This far into the system, you begin to grasp how intentional the entire thing is. The Chinampas weren't scattered or haphazard. No, they were ordered, zoned. Like a living city grid, each floating garden connected with purpose. Some were designated for food, others for flowers, medicine, rituals. There were canals for trade, and canals only the priests used. A system built not just to grow things, but to orchestrate the flow of life, like veins beneath the skin of a pulsing city. And somewhere, right around here, you suspect, was one of the old observation gardens. A place not for growing, but for watching, for listening. You drift silently past an ancient tree, roots dipping like fingers into the water. It's massive, older than memory, its trunk twisted like a spiral staircase. This might have been where the herbalists came, not just to gather, but to study, to sit with plants and snails and soil until they understood more than books could ever teach. Historians argue whether the Aztecs truly believed snails were divine messengers or just garden regulars with stylish shells. What's not disputed, the Nahua people, including the Mexica, gave them names. Specific species had identities, roles. The Tesistli, or trumpet snail, was associated with water and life cycles. Its spiral form mirrored the universe's own winding, looping design. And here's something weird. Some ancient codices show priests using snail shells as instruments. Blow into the right shell, they believed, and you could summon the gods of rain, wind, or even time itself. Did it work? Who knows? But imagine the sound, one long, hollow note echoing through the gardens, stirring birds, shifting air, maybe waking something older than memory. You look around. No birds stir tonight, just the soft flap of leaves and your boat creaking as it bumps a log. Up ahead, you notice a small fire, banked low and steady, glowing through woven reeds. A light like that shouldn't exist out here anymore, but it does. You float closer, and as you approach, you see they're not alone. A group is gathered. No more than 7 people, sitting cross-legged in a circle on a raised wooden platform. Most are older, wrinkled. Still. One woman has silver hair tied in a single long braid. A boy sits beside her, maybe 10, chewing something green with deep concentration. No one speaks. The fire hums quietly, dancing in a breeze that never touches you. You don't interrupt. You're not here to intrude. Instead, you drift past slowly, reverently, like passing a roadside shrine. They don't look at you, but you know they see you. And just as your boat is nearly out of earshot, the old woman hums a familiar tune, the one your boatwoman hummed earlier. You glance back. She's humming it again, too, quietly. You're caught between them now. A thread of sound linking you from boat to fire, from now to then. The canals have no straight lines. They bend, circle, turn back on themselves. So you're not surprised when the place you thought was behind you suddenly appears ahead. That's the nature of spiral logic, of snails, of memory. You find yourself beside a chinampa where the earth is unusually dark, rich, almost black. The soil here is famed, Tierra Negra, born from centuries of composted lake muck, fish remains, ashes, and vegetable matter. Some researchers claim it was among the most fertile soils in the ancient world. Others suggest it had almost magical properties, especially when mixed with specific herbs and human intention. You reach down and touch it. Damp, cool, impossibly alive. The kind of earth that doesn't just grow things, it listens. And just beneath the surface, nestled under a squash leaf, a snail slowly uncurls. It doesn't startle at your touch. It simply emerges, extending one elegant antenna toward the night air like a tiny monk greeting the dawn. You think absurdly that you should name it, something dignified, Fernando, or Lord Spiralton. It blinks, or rather does something that looks like blinking, and begins its slow march across your hand. No hurry, no worry, just movement. Quiet, unbothered, sacred in its slowness. That's the secret of the Chinampas. Not just growing things, but growing them together. Snails, soil, plants, people. The system didn't work because it was efficient. It worked because it was in tune. Every element supported another. Every waste had a use. Even the snails, creeping between stalks, eating algae, fertilizing with microscopic precision, belonged. Modern ecologists still argue whether this was sustainable agriculture's peak or just a fluke of location and timing. Either way, the evidence survives. These gardens fed a city of over 200,000 people. Without metal tools, without wheels, without beasts of burden, just brains, patience, and a baffling level of cooperation from mollusks. The wind shifts again. You smell corn. Not modern, fluffy yellow corn, but the old kind, blue, red, mottled like a galaxy. The kind you can't buy in supermarkets. The kind that remembers stories. Your boatwoman murmurs something, a word in Nahuatl. You don't catch it all, but it sounds like chicheltic, which might mean scarlet, or colored like blood, or that which glows faintly when remembered. You drift in silence. The water hushes you. The moon traces lines across your cheeks. The snails rest. The fire behind you fades. And somewhere beneath the Chinampa roots, the earth turns over in its sleep. You're not sure when it happened, but the canals have grown wider and the banks softer. The reeds thicken into whispering walls, tall and dense, parting just enough to let your boat pass. It's like gliding through a storybook margin, where the edges are frayed and magic seeps in from between the lines. Your hands trail in the water, and it feels warmer now, as if the lake itself is exhaling. There's no rush. You've surrendered to the pace of the journey. Your eyes don't dart for landmarks anymore. You just float, watch, absorb. A cluster of floating gardens drifts by, or maybe you're the one drifting. It's hard to tell anymore. These ones are overgrown, more wild than cultivated. Stalks of amaranth sway in uneven rows, and beans climb wherever they want. Birds have claimed one of the plots entirely, their nests a disorganized collage of straw, feathers, and the occasional plastic twist tie. This is what happens when human hands let go. The Chinampas don't die. They adapt. Rewild. The canals remember their own choreography. You start to notice patterns. Dragonflies in sets of three, water beetles spinning lazy spirals, a single turtle perched on a slanted log like a very tired gondolier. The air hums, not with electricity, but with presence. Nothing dramatic, just a constant, low-frequency awareness. Like the feeling you get when you know someone is behind you, but you're not afraid. That's the feeling of old places still being alive. You pass what might have been a ceremonial garden. It's symmetrical, even now, with tall sunflowers aligned like sentries. Some Aztec ceremonies required flower offerings, massive ones, woven into garlands or floated on the water in concentric rings. Floriculture was more than beauty, it was devotion. Every blossom had a purpose. The xochitl, or flower, was a symbol of truth and poetry. In Nahuatl, flower and song was a phrase that meant true speech, the kind spoken from the heart. Imagine then priests and poets planting marigolds not for color but for clarity, saying what needed to be said through petals and vines, a truth not spoken aloud but grown into being. Some historians think these ceremonies were more private than people realize, performed quietly on the Chinampas at night under starlight with only the frogs and snails as witnesses. Others claim they were grand affairs with flutes, incense, and dancers dressed as deities. Honestly, you like to think both were true. That truth can be loud and soft at once, that flowers, like stories, bloom in all directions. The boatwoman points toward a low hill in the distance, if hill is even the right word, more like a rise. You hadn't noticed it earlier, but it's shaped too evenly to be natural. Covered in grass now, but beneath that layer, probably stone, probably story. The Aztecs were masters of hiding their knowledge in plain sight. And when the Spanish came, when the canals were filled in and the Chinampas dismantled, some of those stories were buried, but not forgotten. You approach the base of the hill. At its edge lies a single stone, flat, carved. The glyphs are faded, softened by time and water, but one is still visible, a spiral. It could mean many things: wind, time, snail, speech. In this moment, it means you're exactly where you're supposed to be. You lean back. Let the boat drift. The moon has lowered now. The stars are doing their slow, ancient migration westward. You listen again, not just to the frogs and the reeds and the lapping water, but to the silence beneath those sounds. The silence that once held an entire city's breath. A city built on water, held up by roots, and whispered into being by men and snails alike. Historians still debate the full scope of Chinampa engineering. How wide were they? How many people did they feed? Were they truly sustainable? Or just a lucky patch of ecosystem? But while academics argue over logistics, the gardens wait patiently, cradling their answers in layers of silt and seed. And now, you're part of that memory, too. You've wandered through maize groves older than your language. You've listened to snails hum silent symphonies in the soil. You've watched a city rebuild itself on floating dreams. And somehow you've made it this far without stepping in any crocodile dung, which, let's be honest, is a small miracle. The boatwoman doesn't say anything, but she shifts the boat's course ever so slightly, and you know it's time. The canal opens again, broader now, like the mouth of a yawn. You can just barely see the outlines of modern buildings in the distance, dim, fuzzy, like someone forgot to finish drawing them. The city is waking up, but you don't rush, you let the moment linger. One last snail, perched on a floating leaf, watches you go, and you wave, because of course you do. And now, we're here, at the softest edge of the journey, where the water slows, the air quiets, and the night folds itself around you like a blanket still warm from the sun. Let yourself melt into the rhythm of those floating gardens, the gentle sway, the hush of leaves brushing against the air, the slow uncoiling of one last snail beginning its moonlit walk. Your breath now is the same as the canals, smooth, unhurried. You've followed the spiral to its center, seen the Chinampas not just as farms, but as songs, as cities, as long forgotten poems written in roots and mud. You've walked where the water remembers, where time isn't a line but a loop, and somehow, even with so much behind you, nothing feels lost. It just feels quiet. The fire's gone out behind you. The old woman's song has faded, but the warmth of that melody stays, stitched into the soft part of your memory. You carry it now, without effort, just as the snails carry their homes, just as the Chinampas carry centuries of breath. Let yourself drift. There's nothing more to find tonight. Only the gentle rustle of amaranth leaves, the soft plop of something small slipping back into the water, the sky tilting slowly toward dawn, and the knowledge that sometimes the oldest things, snails, stories, spirals, are the ones that carry us gently into sleep.